The Trump administration introduced a series of tariffs. These tariffs were taxes on goods imported into the United States. The primary targets were countries like China. However, other nations, including allies, also faced these new import duties. The stated intention was to protect American industries. This marked a significant shift in American trade policy. For decades, the trend had been towards freer trade and lower tariffs. This new approach represented a move towards economic nationalism. These tariffs were not uniform across all goods, they specifically targeted certain products and materials. Steel and aluminum were among the first to be hit with significant import taxes. Later, a wide array of Chinese goods, from electronics to consumer products, faced tariffs. The scale was substantial, affecting billions of dollars worth of trade. The administration believed this would encourage companies to produce more goods domestically. It was also seen as a tool to pressure other countries into new trade deals. The hope was that these deals would be more favorable to the United States. By making imported goods more expensive, domestic alternatives become more attractive. This, in theory, should lead to increased domestic production. However, economic reality is often more complex than simple theory. The imposition of these tariffs set off a chain of events, impacting not just businesses but also ordinary consumers. Many economists expressed concern from the outset. The primary stated goal of the Trump tariffs was to revive American manufacturing. The administration argued that decades of free trade agreements had hollowed out the nation's industrial base. They believed that tariffs would make American-made goods more competitive. This, in turn, would encourage companies to bring factories and jobs back to the United States. The Made in America slogan was central to this narrative. Another key objective was to reduce the United States trade deficit. The trade deficit occurs when a country imports more goods and services than it exports. The Trump administration viewed this deficit, particularly with China, as a sign of economic weakness. Tariffs were seen as a way to make imports more expensive and exports relatively cheaper, thereby narrowing this gap. Furthermore, the tariffs were intended as a negotiating tactic. The idea was to use them as leverage to force other countries, especially China, to change their trade practices. The United States had long-standing complaints about intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer by China. The administration believed that the economic pain caused by the tariffs would compel other nations to agree to new trade deals that were more favorable to American interests. This was a high-stakes game of economic diplomacy. The initial impact of the tariffs was felt across various sectors of the United States economy. Industries that relied heavily on imported steel and aluminum, such as automotive and construction, saw their costs rise. Manufacturers of machinery, appliances, and other goods that used these metals faced a difficult choice. They could absorb the increased costs, which would reduce their profit margins, or they could pass the costs on to consumers, which could reduce demand for their products. American agriculture was particularly hard hit by retaliatory tariffs. When the United States imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, China responded with its own tariffs on American agricultural products. Soybeans, pork, and other farm goods faced significant import duties in China, a major export market. This led to a sharp decline in agricultural exports and falling prices for American farmers. The federal government had to provide billions of dollars in aid to farmers to offset these losses. Some domestic steel and aluminum producers did see an initial benefit. The higher prices for steel and aluminum also hurt downstream industries that used these metals. Amazon, the e-commerce giant, found itself in a unique position regarding these tariffs. As a massive retailer and logistics powerhouse, Amazon's business model relies heavily on the smooth flow of goods, many of which are manufactured overseas, particularly in China. The tariffs directly impacted the cost of importing these products. This presented a significant challenge to Amazon's ability to offer low prices to its customers, a cornerstone of its competitive strategy. Amazon works with countless third-party sellers on its platform, many of whom source their products from China and other affected countries. These sellers, often small and medium-sized businesses, were also hit hard by the tariffs. Amazon also possesses significant resources and capabilities that many smaller businesses lack. Its enormous scale gives it bargaining power with suppliers. Section 5. Amazon's strategic pivot supply chains and sourcing shifts. In response to the tariffs, Amazon began to actively explore ways to diversify its supply chains. This involved looking for manufacturing capacity in countries not targeted by US tariffs or those with more favorable trade agreements. Nations in Southeast Asia, such as Vietnam and Thailand, as well as countries like Mexico, became more attractive as potential sourcing locations. This shift was not instantaneous, as moving production requires significant investment and time. Another key strategy involved working closely with its suppliers to absorb or mitigate some of the tariff costs. Given Amazon's purchasing power, it could negotiate with manufacturers to share the burden of the increased import duties. Amazon invested in optimizing its logistics and warehousing operations to reduce other costs, thereby offsetting some of the financial impact of the tariffs. Amazon also appeared to encourage its third-party sellers to adapt. Section 6. The ripple effect, consumers, and the cost of trade wars. Ultimately, the costs associated with tariffs often find their way to the end consumer. While companies like Amazon might absorb some of the initial impact or negotiate with suppliers, widespread tariffs on imported goods inevitably lead to higher prices in shops and online. For consumers, this meant that everyday items from electronics to clothing and household goods could become more expensive. This effectively acts as a consumption tax, reducing the purchasing power of ordinary households. The extent of these price increases varied depending on the product and the ability of businesses to find alternative, cheaper sources. The impact was not uniform across all consumer groups. Section 7. Unforeseen fallout, retaliation, and global market disruptions. One of the most significant unintended consequences of the Trump tariffs was the swift retaliation from other countries. When the United States imposed tariffs on goods from China, Europe, Canada, and Mexico, these nations responded in kind. They levied their own tariffs on American exports. This tit-for-tat escalation created a cycle of protectionism that harmed businesses on all sides. American farmers, as previously mentioned, were prime targets for retaliatory tariffs, but so were manufacturers of iconic American products, from motorcycles to bourbon whiskey. This retaliation undermined the supposed benefits of the initial tariffs. The trade disputes also created immense uncertainty in global markets. Businesses thrive on predictability. The constant threat of new tariffs or changes to existing ones made it difficult for companies to plan for the future. Investment decisions were delayed or canceled. Companies hesitated to build new factories or hire more workers when the rules of international trade were in flux. This uncertainty acted as a drag on global economic growth. Financial markets also reacted nervously to trade war escalations, with stock market volatility often increasing in response to new tariff announcements or trade negotiation breakdowns. Furthermore, the tariffs strained relationships between the United States and its traditional allies. Section 8. Assessing Amazon's gambit resilience in the face of tariffs. Amazon's response to the tariffs demonstrated its remarkable resilience and adaptability. The company's vast resources, sophisticated logistics, and global reach allowed it to implement strategies that smaller businesses could only dream of. By actively diversifying its sourcing away from heavily tariffed regions and leveraging its bargaining power with suppliers, Amazon managed to mitigate some of the direct cost impacts. Its investment in private label brands also provided a buffer, allowing it to offer competitively priced goods, even when traditional brands faced tariff-related pressures. This proactive approach helped protect its market share. However, it is important to note that even Amazon could not entirely escape the negative effects of the trade war. The company likely incurred significant costs in reconfiguring its supply chains and managing the increased complexity of international trade. While it may have absorbed some tariff costs to maintain price competitiveness, this would have inevitably squeezed its profit margins on certain products. Section 9. The road ahead, tariffs, trade, and tomorrow's economy. Looking to the future, the experience with the Trump tariffs offers valuable lessons about the complexities of modern trade policy. It has become clear that tariffs are a blunt instrument. While they may offer short-term relief to specific domestic industries, they often come with significant collateral damage. This includes higher costs for consumers, retaliatory measures from trading partners, and widespread economic uncertainty. The future of U.S. trade policy remains a key question. Subsequent administrations may choose to maintain some tariffs, unwind others, or pursue entirely new strategies. However, The disruptions caused by the recent trade disputes have likely led many businesses, including giants like Amazon, to permanently rethink their supply chain vulnerabilities. The push for greater diversification and resilience in sourcing is likely to continue regardless of specific tariff levels. Companies are now more aware of geopolitical risks and the potential for sudden policy shifts to impact their operations.